Sure. So let's get started, and I'll call the meeting to order. And the first order of business that we've got on our agenda is review and discussion of the Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board's proposed legislative amendments. Can we have some background on this, Mike, and then we can go forward with the people that need to speak?
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. I sent along a summary of the proposed legislation along with the agenda yesterday. I think that someone who'd be better positioned to talk about this, well, I think there's a variety of people who are better informed upon it than I am. But it could be Chloe, it could be Cynthia, or it could be Kristen, not Kristen Record. But
not
Kristen.
Me.
No, the other physics teaching Kristen.
The other physics teaching Kristen.
Okay, we'll start first with Kristen Basiagic. If you could tell us a little bit about what we've got going here.
Sure. So I'm the chair of the ad hoc committee that was looking into alternative minimum content knowledge assessment. So it's our ad hoc committee's job to kind of deal with figuring out how we want to make these pathways available, what pathways are there, and the public act that gave the certification board its mandate says that we are supposed to be updating these guidelines every 2 years. It's supposed to be based on knowledge of how, oops, sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Based on our information on how it's improving certification numbers, how it's increasing diversity, if it is in fact helping people join the teaching profession, and whether or not it's, allowing CAPE certification for EPPs to continue. So we have a few different criteria we're looking at that's supposed to be amended periodically. So when we were thinking of what we want for legislation, we didn't necessarily want to list, these specific pathways if we know that every 2 years we're going to need to revise them and get them through the whole legislative process. So the proposed bill you have in front of you has language that is flexible. It reflects the mandate from the Public Act, showing that we are going to be reviewing and updating these guidelines periodically based on data. It does also affirm the certification board's commitment to keeping subject area assessment as a mandatory first step. Especially the EPPs felt that was really important because they use data from Praxis 2, from the AISTIL and other standardized assessments as part of their CAPE accreditation data. But from there, we know that we want to have evidence-based, rigorous, feasible means of assessing minimum content knowledge. And we want to be able to have the flexibility to allow our board to do this thoughtful review. So do I have any questions so far?
Other questions? Questions or comments up to date? Okay.
Okay. So in the proposed statutory language, section 1, the most important part is this new addition. So all underlined, not later than July 1st, 2025. That date was important to us. We had a lot of discussion about this date because, as you might know, some of the standards and regulations are rolling back July 1st, 2026. And we wanted to give certifying bodies, EPPs, students, student potential teachers, we wanted to give them these guidelines a year in advance to give them the ability to start before the other regulations start falling out of place. So the July 1st, 2025, the ad hoc committee and then the whole Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board would be releasing those guidelines that will give potential teachers different or alternative pathways to minimum content knowledge assessment. So the this very first one says that we want to achieve satisfactory evaluation on the appropriate State Board of Education approved subject area assessment. But beyond that, right? So let's say everyone takes their subject area assessment first. Beyond that, whatever alternative pathways there are, we want them to be evidence-based, rigorous, and feasible, valid and reliable, and where it says professional bodies responsible for accrediting teacher preparation programs, we currently mean CAPE. Right? And as we give these updates, we want to be able to have the certification board, be the one that is reviewing and doing the deep dive onto these minimum content area assessments and reflecting that periodically. All the later language after that first paragraph is actually the goal of all of that language is just to be self-consistent. So in section 2.3, for instance, instead of saying just the subject area assessment, it now says satisfy the requirements for demonstrating minimum content knowledge as established by the Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board. So many of the later paragraphs, the changes where it has crossing out and then underlying are just making the language reflective of section 1 of the 3 standards we're looking at for alternative minimum content knowledge assessment. Down in section 2, similar, it's replacing where it says a specific standardized test with the content knowledge standard established by the Educator Preparation and Certification Board. Similar in section 3, so it's saying that in section 3, it's repealing part of the general statutes, and C would be satisfying minimum content knowledge established by Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board. Right? So notice that it's not laying out specifics on what the new alternative minimum content knowledge assessment will be. My ad hoc committee has met 3 times, and we are not ready to put forward specific answers to that yet, but we've reviewed many proposals. We are on track to be giving this guideline by July 1st. And so we think the legislation that was put forward makes sense because it allows us to do the work and not rush it. If we were to keep to the original timeline of the Public Act, we would have needed to have an alternative minimum content knowledge assessment in place by our second meeting of the whole board. It was just not feasible with the time that we were given. So we appreciate the additional time to let us, do this job right, because it is going to be so impactful for incoming educators. So at this time, I would be happy to answer any questions.
I just have one quick question. One thing, these changes sound reasonable. One thing that's happened at least once during my time on the state board that I think we want to avoid is when we have, individual teachers, I think, coming before the state board and trying to kind of, regarding, I think, alternative certification issues. Is there any language in here that you would expect to lead to that? I'm just trying to make sure we've thought about that eventuality and tried to sort of make sure there are contingencies before you get to the board as much as possible.
Great. So my understanding of that process is that incoming teachers that might need a waiver for some reason, they kind of put together a packet and then they bring that to the State Board of Education for approval. And I believe that's just started this year, right?
That is correct, Kristen. And Mr. Zimmerman, that's one of the reasons why they've come forward. And I think for our new certification council, it's going to be very important to know that legislation also exists.
Okay.
And that as we are proposing, we're thinking about the different pathways in which and how someone receives certification or their initial certification, that we do think about what are some things in which they may be asking for a waiver, and do our pathways, are there questions that could come up, or is there something we can, understanding that language, make sure that we take into account when we're thinking about these specific pathways, what that will be. I think the important thing is that we know we always start with the praxis, and that is something that the waiver as well, they would have to have those pieces of the puzzle before they're even presenting. And that piece, as well as it's new for us internally, we have also put in more tighter systems that we're also putting in place as a department before anything now goes in front of you. Having learned from that first experience, we now have a system before that gets there, a more clearer one to make sure that we're consistent and that what is bring forth, they have met all of our specific requirements to meet that legislation. So.
Okay, so you don't anticipate this raising any additional issues related to that as long as we pay attention to the other elements
Absolutely.
of this process as the drafting. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Zimmerman, what we're also doing, I apologize, Kristen. Kristen and the ad hoc committee are working on this because obviously with timing and everyone's schedule, there's only so much you can get done in our regular meeting. However, what we do in our regular meeting, and if things come out of this ad hoc committee, I or anybody from the team or the certification council always ask if we need people from the certification department to come and educate the whole certification council on our process. So we are thinking about those things before we're kind of going into work in regards to different pathways or whatever is being brought forward.
Erin and then Kristen, record.
Deputy Commissioner, what you just described, shouldn't that be in the document here, that is part of the process? I mean, it seems like, I'm glad that Seth brought up that question, because it seems like that's a piece that seems to be missing in this document of what currently the department as well as the state board does prior to this. I'm just wondering, why is it not in the document?
Well, they're two different statutory languages.
Right,
What
so
Mr.
my question, maybe this will help with Erin's because it was basically on the same thing. I was looking that in the sort of in the summary, there's more than one statute for educator preparation. The content knowledge piece is only one piece of earning a certificate in Connecticut. So like you still have to have coursework requirements and student teaching and practicum requirements, but that's not part of the overview of this document. And I think to Erin's point, it would be very helpful for the whole board and for anyone else to understand that content knowledge is not the thing that grants you a certificate. It's multifaceted. So we're only talking about one piece to the puzzle. And to Seth's question, when that particular person came before us, that particular person was seeking a waiver, if my recollection is correct, because of lack of coursework and lack of practicum experience. That particular person's waiver request was not related per se to content knowledge. And so this is just one of the silos that has to be met. And I think it would help the document and the presentation to the whole board if that was made a little clear. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on top of you, Erin, but I was thinking, I think the same thing you were.
Yeah, because I'm correct, Kristen, the other Kristen. This is a document that's going to the Ed Committee that you want to go tomorrow to the board and then to the Ed Committee. And I think it's crucial, especially going to the Ed Committee, that this is very specific and that these things are specified. It's really the reason I jumped on this call, because I was wondering why this didn't wait for the regular. I mean, why was this such a push to be today for the whole board to vote tomorrow? That concerns me, because that's generally not how we conduct our business on the board. We always go through committee work first. But this committee is meeting tomorrow, and I just don't understand. Mike, am I correct? We have 60 days, don't we, to respond? You're muted, Mike.
Yes, I am. Yes, Erin, you're absolutely correct. On statute, we have 60 days.
And that concerned me right from the start, and that's why, and as I'm reading through this document, it concerns me with some of the pieces that might be missing. And I think you're going to see this same conversation perhaps take place if it goes to the board tomorrow, or it simply is, tabled for further discussion. I don't know, but I know, Kristen, you want to reply.
Yeah, I'd happy to be to talk about the timeline. Part of the reason that we're so interested in having this go forward sooner rather than later is because we know that there are timelines associated with the legislative process, and what we don't want to happen is, other bills to be put forward that don't have our committee's input. So for instance, the placeholder bill for teacher certification that's in right now does lay out specific alternative pathways to get the minimum content knowledge. And like Kristen said, it's not EPP completion or student teaching or the other coursework, but the minimum content knowledge was supposed to be the purview of the certification board. So we want to be able to have our input and not have some other body or some other individual put in specific recommendations that don't go through our board. So we were very worried for the timeline. Oh, sorry, the echo's happening again. We were very worried for the timeline that if we didn't put in a specific remedy to the legislation that's already proposed, that it would be mandated for us. And since our job is to review the certification process, it was problematic to us that there were specific alternative minimum pathways that were not vetted by the Educator Preparation and Certification Board. So I hope that explains some of the timeline and why it was requested to have this meeting and then brought up for the April board meeting, is so that we'd be able to see this go in for this session. And I do understand your concern that if there was confusion over whether this was referring to content knowledge specifically, this one specific assessment, or the whole process, I could see why that would be concerning.
Yeah, I do think the specifics need to be washed out here or made clearer on the document. That's my opinion. I mean, I'm not a member of this legislation policy committee, but I do feel that they need to be a clearer note before it goes to the full board.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Kristen, maybe a little more explanation about the other bill that's the placeholder bill might be in order. I could be wrong, but I thought that bill, in addition to bypassing your boards and their input, does it not also eliminate the language about going something being approved by the State Board of Education itself?
So it's funny because there's two revisions to this proposed bill. So I'll speak to the first one and then I'll do the second. So originally the placeholder bill had listed as two alternative minimum pathways. One would be to do a portfolio system that would need to be vetted and approved by the State Department of Ed. They would be the people who would be creating the portfolio rubric, assessing the portfolio rubric. And it also said, instead of taking a praxis, that you could just have a content area degree, right? A bachelor's degree, a content area bachelor's degree. So let's say I had a teacher that wanted to teach math. If they had a bachelor's in math, then you don't need to take the praxis too. You're just going to, have to go through the other coursework and things. So with the first version of the placeholder bill, our problem was that it superseded the Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board's authority, and then had these two very specific alternative minimum pathways that would skip teachers taking Praxis, AFSTL, and the other assessments that are necessary for EPPs to remain accredited through CAPE. That's a large part of the data they use. So that first version of the placeholder bill was problematic because it skipped the Preparation and Certification Board. It had two different criteria that prevented EPPs from collecting content knowledge information. And that original placeholder bill also had those two new pathways to go into place for July. So that it would require the state Department of Education to create a portfolio system by July. And then the placeholder bill was revised. In the new placeholder bill, it actually has similar language to what we have in front of you, except it created a new pathway, which was the teacher residency program, which, is not a problem or a concern. It's just hasn't been discussed by the certification board, right? But then it also removed any state Board of Education oversight or co-checks and balances. So in the Public Act that gave the Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board its authority, it requires that any regulations or legislative proposals from the State Board of Education get sent to the Preparation and Certification Board, and vice versa. Erin, as you mentioned, with that 60-day leeway, so we can have time to review and look over each other's proposals, right? But the proposed language in the placeholder bill currently removes the State Board of Education's oversight. So whereas the original Public Act had both of our boards working together, side by side, the new placeholder bill removes oversight from State Board of Education. It actually doesn't remove oversight the other way around. So if the State Board of Education had a legislation or a policy or a regulation that you wanted to put forward about certification, it would still need to get approved by the certification board, but not vice versa. That new placeholder language was not actually discussed by our ad hoc committee or by our board as a whole, but that is the content of the current placeholder legislation.
So if I'm hearing the whole story correctly, your goal is to put forth this language as being preferable to what is in the second version of the placeholder bill.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And this was what I was saying about why we wanted to act sooner rather than later, is because, with the placeholder bill that's already in place, if new items get put in, if new pathways get put in, if, we lose oversight from the State Board of Education, right? If it's being put forward without our chance to have our input or review, we're just worried that it's kind of removing the mandate that our certification board is supposed to have. So, if the language is unclear or needs improvement, this would be still the preferable language to what is the current placeholder.
Go ahead, Erin.
This is probably for Deputy Commissioner or Attorney McCann. This placeholder bill that Kristen is referring to has, I'm guessing the Commissioner is well aware of this placeholder bill. Has she or the department testified about it? Has it come to a hearing or anything like that? Are you aware?
Jennifer, do you have an answer to that?
We didn't.
I believe I
test-
do have an,
Okay. I was going to
Go
say
ahead,
from the
Cynthia.
department perspective, we did not testify. We
Mhm.
did give Laura feedback and then she shares it in whatever, because it's already past the time.
Okay.
That change in the language came after the testifying piece.
Okay. I mean,
And so
I just asked that because it certainly isn't our first time that we've been, bullied into legislation, like, taking away rights of the State Board of Education. But go ahead, Jennifer.
sure, chair of the Preparation Certification Board. So what had occurred was that the board actually had voted on the original language to testify in opposition to the original language of the bill. And we were at the hearing and we provided that testimony. My understanding is that they observed our committee meeting, our board meeting in March, and took things that were heard during that meeting to create this substitute language. There are no further hearings on it. We received notification on a Sunday and they voted on it on a Tuesday. So it's been voted out of committee and sits with the Senate at this time, if I'm remembering correctly. I did speak with one of the committee members of the Education Committee, and they are very interested in getting some sort of language from us or seeing the proposed language. So we wanted to make sure that we were allowing that to happen, and though it feels a little bit, on the rush side and not the usual, we wanted to, show that we could get this kind of thing done with SDE and SBE to ensure that, the original statute is being followed as part of that. Our hope is to continue to do this work in this way.
Thank you. Chloe.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm serving as the administrator for the certification board as of right now. And I also work closely with Laura Stefan on legislative items. So that's exactly right what Jennifer Rodriguez just said. The part of the substitute bill was voted out of the Education Committee and now sits on the Senate floor. They haven't brought it up yet, but it does remove any State Board of Education oversight. It also, the bill itself, the substitute bill, is titled something along the lines of recommendations of the Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board, but no insight from this board was given to the committee. So I think the board is just trying to make sure that if there is any input to give, they can offer that. And it might seem rushed, but we're just trying to follow the proper channels for legislative language as is required by statute. But this time of the legislative session can always kind of seem rushed. So yeah, I just wanted to offer that context as well.
Other comments, other input? Anything else by the committee? We would entertain a motion to either table this for additional work or to pass it out as is. Seth, Kristen, any thoughts?
I'd like to make a motion to approve this to go to the full board with a more precise overview summary of the process.
Seth,
would-
is there's, go ahead,
Go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
Kristen.
I said that would reflect the conversation we had in this committee.
Seth, is there a second?
Second, sure. If that's the motion, I second it.
Okay, additional comments. Kristen, I guess Kristen B. One of the comments I have is, can this be done before the meeting tomorrow?
Sure. So that would just be editing the summary sections to better reflect the conversation we've been having.
Yeah, I think to place this in the context of the broader process, maybe was sort of what I was taking away from the discussion.
Yes, I think it's feasible that we can help make edits to the summary sections. I think that would make sense.
Chloe, Deputy Commissioner, anything you might see challenging on that part from your end?
I'll be doing the work, so I can do it.
I can help support Chloe as well as Kristen in regards to any questions in regards to the implementation of this, which is, I think, very important, and sometimes why some things need to be left broad, because there will be other factors that do come up that you want to make sure is encompassed without knowing what that's going to be, right? And also allows for the process and how it works here at the department to be able to be captured, so we can be able to, meet what we're writing here, and also meet allowing those who are going to be permitted an initial certificate, because that's what this is really encompasses, is that initial, that we're able to do our piece of the work too. So we'll figure that out. But it does have to, I just want to make this very clear that some pieces do need to be left broad. So when the committee starts working and things come up, because they will, right? All these factors and whatever comes out of this legislative season that we don't even know what's to come, that we're able to address it in this council, and then be able to bring it forward, which is the goal, that we still have the process that we have in place, which is having the State Board of Ed and the Certification Council meet somewhere in the middle, in making sure that we can get all the pieces of the puzzle brought to place.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about the broad nature of the proposed legislative changes. That's not my concern. I just want maybe the summary or the background piece of information, as Seth said, to maybe set it more appropriately in the landscape. Because again, we are just speaking about one particular aspect of educator certification, and there are others. And I wouldn't want to give someone the false impression that simply content knowledge is the only thing that we look at, because there is a whole piece to the puzzle. And I to use Seth's language, putting it out in the context of the whole landscape, I think is important.
Understood.
Mike, do you want to read back the motion, and then we can call for a vote? How about I start and you add in?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. The motion before us is that we forward this Connecticut Educator Preparation Certification Board proposed legislative amendment to the full board, with the caveat that the explanation of the amendment be more inclusive of the actual certification that needs to happen.
I think that works. A more precise summary of the proposal.
Okay, that works for me. Does that work for you, Kristen and Seth?
Yes.
Okay. That being the motion that's on the floor, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We will certainly look forward to seeing and hearing from you tomorrow, and the presentation being, like I said, more precise and a little bit more detailed in terms of what the process will be going forward. Seth, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, that's my broader context and gesture.
Broader context.
Yes. Anything else to come before this committee today? Anything else? If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thanks. See you all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.